This is Steve Wells.
And I'm Jeffrey Feldberg. Welcome to the Sell My Business podcast.
This podcast is brought to you by Deep Wealth. Are you a business owner who is wondering how to either grow your business, sell it, or both? Or maybe in today's environment, you're wondering how to make your business pandemic-proof. Visit deepwealth.com to find out how you can master the strategies to grow and extract the deep wealth from your business. Visit www.deepwealth.com.
Today, we're delighted to welcome Steve Kohler in our interview. Steve is the president of Ridge Global and has served in the past in a number of roles for its affiliates. Steve has previously served as the first president of Space Florida, a Florida special district focused on economic development within the aerospace economic sector. And before that, Steve was the president of Winner Global Defense, a privately held company focused on military and non-military applications. Earlier, Steve served as Senior Vice President for Corporate Advisory Services for C.B. Richard Ellis, Pittsburgh. Steve has also served then-Governor Tom Ridge as Director of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Governor's Action Team. Steve, delighted to have you with us. Thank you so much. I know you're incredibly busy. You have quite the background and the experience and the insights. Before we get going, why don't you take a few moments and tell our community a bit about your story? It's fascinating.
Thank you, Jeffrey, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. My background and my history, my professional career has kind of moved back and forth, if you will, between private sector and public sector and in quasi-public sector service. So I've had the advantage and the experience to see the vision of those activities from the lens of those organizational structures. And that includes large publicly traded companies on occasion and then smaller, closely held businesses that were more entrepreneurial. My career began in the field of economic development and then spent a number of years doing classic economic development at a community-wide level. That we were pretty effective in how we managed that activity, so much so, I guess, that it got the attention of the then newly elected governor of Pennsylvania, Tom Ridge. And I got a call from him and his offices to come down and talk to them about the prospects of joining that administration to lead the statewide economic development efforts for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania at the time, which I accepted. It was kind of like getting a draft notice. So I accepted the assignment, and it was extraordinarily valuable for me on that career stop. And then I moved from there to the private sector, a large company called C.B. Richard Ellis, involved in corporate real estate. And from there, then joined a smaller, more entrepreneurial company called Winner Global Defense, where I served, led their efforts there. Interesting little point about that company, closely held company, that the founder of which was a man by the name of Jim Winner. He had invented a product. He was a classic entrepreneur called the Club, which was a steering wheel locking device many of us remember, that at the time he built a real high level of brand awareness for his relatively small company. Is very successful. And that was one of the reasons I was interested in being able to join and support that effort, because he had built that company from the ground up to a very successful enterprise on a global scale. And then left that one to have a real fun period in my career, which was back to the semi-public sector, joining a new organization created by a statute in the state of Florida called Space Florida as its first president and CEO, and partly charged with standing the organization up, building their strategic and business plans, and then fast forward to where I am currently, rejoining Governor Ridge as the president of Ridge Global, based here in Washington, D.C., and providing business advisory services to our clientele, which range in size from very small to very large clients.
Steve, you have such a unique background in that you have the government and you have the business experience. Today, we're going to really concentrate most of our discussion on the coronavirus and what's happening and how businesses are going to adjust. So I'd be interested to hear, you've probably been through some recessions, but how do you view what we're seeing, given your background in the government and the business, and any kind of general thought or experience that you've noticed through this?
Yeah, Stephen, thank you. I'll give you one comparison that, because of my age, is somewhat relevant. Years ago, when I was just beginning my career, I can recall the economic conditions in the U.S. at the time We had inflation running at about 12%. The community I was living in at the time had an unemployment at almost 18.5%. And interest rates were approaching 14% for commercial use. And my business focus at the time was economic development. Take a very distressed community and do your best with your organization to attract and build job opportunities and growth. I can recall at that time seeing lines of several hundred people standing online at businesses that were looking to hire maybe 6 or 7 people at the time. And there was a sense of, it was purely economic in that moment, but this desperation, if you will, within the community. And not hopelessness, but real concern, genuine concern. You could see it in the streets. Fast forward to where we stand today. I see similar, maybe even more acute, because it's public health and it's a healthcare that is totally, aside from the health risks that we all read about, it has totally put the economy globally into a state of convulsion. So there's a little bit of similarity there that I see with that experience, although I would say this one is much more acute given where we are so many years later, the technologies that we rely on. The flip side is I see hope. I think that because of the way we've advanced from a technological standpoint, our capacity to react quickly, adjust, and make course corrections is far more efficient today than it was, in this case, 35, 40 years ago.
Steve, some great insights, and you mentioned hope. And I know at Deep Wealth, hope it's everything. So if you put yourself in the shoes of a business owner who has been struggling through all of this, has found a way just to keep on moving things forward, to have the business live another day. And now we start to look at getting things back to the new normal, whatever that new normal is. Based on what you've seen and where you are today, what would be some strategies and some insights that a business owner can put into play to get business going again?
Yeah, great question. I think that there are a number of things, and hope and having that capacity to recognize that there is a future at the end of this. And most entrepreneurs that I've worked with and we advise currently have that capacity embedded in their genetic makeup. So there's always a need to be adjusting and managing a business in a way that you're able to deal with the changes in the competitive landscape. But now you have to deal with this effects of this public health emergency and COVID-19. So some of the things that we're seeing are the need to create a business dynamic that fully embeds this need for adequate awareness of social distancing and planning for that kind of environment, and how does that affect my business? So obviously we're doing this discussion today from these various remote locations. I see that continuing in some fashion into the future, where if you're an organization that has physical space needs, there may be some alternating days for employees to work on site versus remotely, and being able to structure the business to accommodate that. If you're a small business, and I see it in the food service industries right now, they're adjusting as we speak on the fly to be able to accommodate clients, maintain viability, and becoming very creative on how they do so with a strong recognition and a clear eye towards maintaining public health expectations for their employees and for their customers. So I think that strategically, companies, as we speak, are sitting down and formulating their own back to work to accommodate this kind of capability. And some of our clients are coming to us and asking for some advice or counsel on what we would see in that area, like what they should be doing if they have large facilities where numbers of employees come in. Are there certain types of adjustments to their sensors for security that could be made that could help them on a public health basis? Should they be redesigning, as an example, the layouts of conference rooms to go circular tables versus rectangular to create more spacing? Do they need to have, as I said earlier, alternating days of showing up at that location to minimize density? The business owners have to take that into their calculus as how they go forward and continue to manage and service the needs and interests of their clients.
I, as well, Steve, have been through a lot of economic cycles in business and personal business and the economy. And, those difficult times that are those pruning times in the middle of that, it was not fun. But when I've looked back, I've seen really tremendous amount of growth personally and in my understanding of business. I wonder, now you're in touch with so many different people. Do you get a sense of that? Are we still too much in the middle, or do you see any benefit of what we're going through?
I do. And, you don't like to say that, usually you see the people that really shine emerge in these kinds of events of desperation. And, I can recall, look at what happened in the immediate after effects of 9/11. It's seared into our consciousness. This kind of occurred in a little bit more of a slow motion effect, but it's the same dynamic as we sit today, because the reaction is not unlike what we saw instantly occur in 9/11 in New York, Washington, central Pennsylvania, and then globally with the recognition that this was a virus of its own type that we had to contend with. And so whole businesses emerged and people rose to the top to help lead and understand in that regard. I think we're in the same place here. I think, however, this time there's a much more extensive or pervasive human quality because it affects everybody. This hasn't been a specific geographic location. It's been across the board. It hasn't been whether you're ethnically in this category or that category. It's been across the board. It's been indiscriminate in how it's applied. So I think the value is that it's creating the environment that everyone, top to bottom, managers, employees, leaders, clergy, whatever you want to call it, have to recognize and make the modification to adjust this. And it fully integrates your professional world and your personal world, regardless of the type of work that you do. And so that I think the balancing of that, as I said, I've been on a few of these calls where our new member of the family, which is a puppy, a dog, has participated. And then I've seen other people who it's made more high-profile individuals much more human, because now you're seeing them in their home setting, and maybe they're standing there and a child walks behind, and it adds an element of humility and humbleness to the humanity, if you will. So I think that that's a real valuable piece of what COVID-19 has brought to the global community. And I think that'll embed itself, if you will, in how all businesses, not just small, medium-sized, go about conducting their business. I think there'll be a level of, I hope that there's a level of compassion to how they approach the bottom line.
Steve, you've done this as a leader, both in business as well as in politics. At Deep Wealth, we call it the ability to pivot so you can profit. And a lot of people pivot and profit. Sometimes they don't realize that they're doing it. In good times, it may not be as necessary, but in challenging times, in a pandemic time, it's absolutely crucial. And what we've been talking about here at Deep Wealth is if you want to pandemic-proof your business, you're forced to right now. You didn't choose it. You can't choose what happens around you, but you can choose how you respond to something. And it'd be interesting to hear from you the importance of the ability to pivot and profit as a business, and why business owners have to start thinking that way if they're going to be here for tomorrow and the foreseeable future.
A great question and setup there, Jeffrey. I'll tell you this. I think that this pandemic response, I see another parallel that we're in the midst of living through as we speak, and that's the cyber vulnerabilities with respect to hacking and both the cyber issues that every business has to take into account, although it doesn't seem to get the same level of attention at times, but it has similar kinds of economic effects. So up until the emergence of this pandemic, the need for businesses across the board, public, private, governments, and otherwise, to focus on their level of resiliency as it applies to cybersecurity was necessary and apparent, and in our view, was pressing businesses either through regulatory control or for the need to maintain a level of competitiveness in their market to become more cyber resilient. and to be able to look at cyber resiliency and planning for that in a way that would be to avoid the infection, as it were, in your business from a cyber perspective and any potential compromise that may create with respect to profitability. And so a number of businesses and the whole industry emerged to support and provide services to clients around that area, us being one of them. And then you move to where we are now with this pandemic. It has all the markings, if you will, of a pervasive global cyber attack. And so I can tell you this, that I remember years ago we were doing risk advisory work aligned with the insurance industry around cyber. And we were meeting with one of the large insurers, in this case it was Lloyd's, at their corporate location in London, and asked the question of the leadership at Lloyd's, what keeps you awake? This was 5 years ago. They said two things: global cyber event and pandemic. That comment's not lost on me today, I can tell you for sure, because here we are. So this pandemic proofing the business, and the thought process, in my view, that businesses will now be looking at as they work through this pandemic and beyond is not unlike what they're having to deal with on cyber. And so there's a little bit of a parallel there. And I think that some of the lessons learned might be, if we look at how we approach our cyber resiliency and apply some of those techniques to pandemic exposure, it may help us.
So if I hear you, obviously preparing for any type of disaster, whether it's a pandemic or cyber, is obviously beneficial. And we don't really know what those disasters or problems are going to be. We may not even be able to prepare for the solution. So how do we get ourselves ready to kind of paraphrase a popular book, anti-fragile? I mean, how do we adapt to that?
Here's what I think is going to happen in part. And we at Ridge Global, this is part of what we do. We provide this kind of advisory work for our clients. There are, within the cyber realm, if I use that parallel, there are frameworks that have been established that are used as baselines for many businesses. In the case of cyber in the U.S., it's the NIST, the Standards Institute's baseline framework for cyber, that is then used as a baseline to build resiliency platforms that are applied to all kinds of industries. We go to what we're experiencing right now, the pandemic, and here we see briefings that are coming out daily on what's the federal government doing, what are each of the states doing in terms of reacting to this. And one of the issues that they're having to take a look at is better management of supply chains and resiliency to be able to prepare for this. So I think all the lessons learned, and there will be many documents prepared on how the federal government, how some of the states reacted to this situation, including the post-event investigations on the source and cause and communication. All of those lessons are going to come, in my view, going to result in pandemic preparation frameworks that will be then laid out for the business community and for people and governments to embrace, if you will, or at least look to adopt, to embed, if you will, into their business operating plans. So that at some point in the future, when a company, and if you're a publicly traded company, you're familiar with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act and the need to be able to satisfy your financial controls. There may be a time when you have a similar cyber act that's a version of that, and then ultimately you have someone who can attest to your level of preparedness as it relates to a pandemic or public health emergency. And there may be standards that will be put in place for people to adopt and have ready to go, so at least they can be as prepared as they can based on the experience. It may take some time to get there, but I think if you're managing the risk of an enterprise, you would take that into account so that your insurers that provide you with general liability, business interruption, directors and officers, and all the lines of insurability that you need, they're going to look at how you protect against your risk exposure in order to determine the level of policy cover and the policy form. And so in our world, it kind of relates to how do you manage the risk? Pandemic is now forefront. It's now in everybody's front of mind consciousness that it has a direct and an indirect at the same time effect on our ability to conduct business.
Steve, you bring up an excellent point of managing risk, and oftentimes business owners tend to overlook the power that effective communications can have. So I'm wondering, from your experience in both the public and private sectors, in a challenging time, in a pandemic, what kinds of strategies should a business owner be considering as it comes to communications, and communications to whom?
Well, we're a firm believer in absolute transparency and the need to be able to be out front, both with your public face and your internal looking communications to your organization. We go through this oftentimes. There's so much pressure to maintain protection, reputational protection, brand protection for businesses that in some cases they'll overlook the need to address a problem front on. And our approach is always you need to be able to be out front, and your leadership should be able to admit when there's been a problem or a challenge, but be able to convey what the strategy is going forward. So you're managing an event that creates a risk exposure in real time. So that's one of the things that we look at fairly closely as we advise firms as they're looking at creating resiliency plans, that they include corporate emergency response and various aspects, and they all plug into one comprehensive strategy that allows for that kind of, in our view, transparency inward and outward, in as much as they can without compromising any kind of legal concerns. But that's the fundamental takeaway that we see with regard to managing that part of the risk.
But not all of it is going to fall on the shoulders of the leader. And that leader is going to have to instill confidence in their people around them. And at the same time, we've spoken to some, and while they put on a strong face, they've got to get away and just go, whoa, how do I recover? I've got to rebuild my batteries back up. It's a tough thing to be a leader. You know what, Steve, you're right. In fact, I can recall early on in this pandemic, and I thought it was one of the better short YouTube style videos that a CEO did. And it was the CEO of one of the major cruise lines. I don't recall his name right now, but he had to get out there and he had to be able to make a statement both for his employees, but also to the community, knowing that he was just at the beginning of having to do whatever they need to do as a company and as an organization to ensure that they are protecting against this kind of threat and this kind of risk. And what a tough assignment that is. But I saw real leadership in the way this person stood up and made those comments. I mean, he did it in a very effective way. The messaging was direct. It was an admission that this is very difficult and that they were working their way through it, but they wanted everyone to know, both shareholders, potential consumers of their cruise services, and others, that they were doing everything they could to make this work. So I thought that demonstrated, to your point, really in a very difficult time, strong leadership. It's easy to lead when times are good, but the real leaders that show well, in my view, and really demonstrate the capacity is when it's tough. And when it's really in tough, difficult times like we're finding now. That's why you're seeing certain people, in my view, emerge and really can manage. The game slows down for them in the throes of a problem like this. And that comes, that in this case, it came through on that message.
Steve, at Ridge Global, I'm wondering, what's the backroom banter that you're hearing, both as a company, but also with the business owners, the CEOs, the leaders that you're talking with? What would a day in the life be like in terms of the types of conversations that you're having? And I ask that as an insight to share with the community what you're seeing that's not working from a leader or a business owner, and what is working, that we can share that out there so that people can take that for themselves and bring that through to their employees, their community, society in general that they're serving.
Well, I can tell you that a little bit of the inside scoop is that we've become extraordinarily busy over the past several weeks, more so than I thought, both interestingly from prospective client interests looking to either modify their existing business line to be able to accommodate the concerns that have emerged through this pandemic, which is, it's got two purposes. One, it's a noble position to be in, assuming they have a value to bring. And then secondarily, they can see there is a potential business opportunity that helps them to grow. So it's kind of a win-win. So we're seeing a lot of that. We're also looking at companies and some of the backroom discussions that we've had is been on what the strategies are going back. And I think we talked about that a little bit earlier. What is it we need to do differently today, but to be able to conduct our business at a level of profitability and resiliency, because our focus tends to be over on the resiliency side, in a way that we can maintain the momentum that we were enjoying before this event occurred, and to be able to take it into account. Believe it or not, some of the things that we get involve international-based interests. So there's this whole dynamic about, I'll call it political instability, caused or made more apparent through this pandemic. And so it's how do we look at the global economic environment for our business in a way that addresses some of the things that we've seen countries that have been able to react pretty well if we've got interest there versus other ones. So we look at those kinds of things and we talk about, what is it that needs to change in the way some of the clients address some of the markets that they wanted to pursue. And looking inward at our own operation is how we will conduct our capability to advise clients in a way that enables us to maintain a level of responsibility and responsiveness around this change in environment, instead of face-on meetings, how we do some of the things that we do for our clients.
You mentioned a while back that one of the side benefits of this has been somewhat of a humility that you've seen. I'm thinking about consumer behavior. I mean, there's a lot going on now. You see a lot of families together. You see a lot of people outside walking. You see I know not all businesses need a non-consumer kind of mentality, but you see, looking at their values and wondering, what purchases they may make or may not. And some of that could be, more difficult for some businesses. And I know you probably don't know the answer, but maybe you've heard from some of your clients and people. What do they think of this consumer behavior? Will this last? Will it not?
I'll give you part of my observation, and this is a personal observation based on where I've been working out of my home office for the past month. What I've learned that I've now known neighbors not by virtue of their profession and their company, but because they're my neighbor. Even though they may have led, in the case of a couple of them, very high-performing people. But when you take away those trappings and you only see somebody on an intermittent basis, you don't really know them. So what I've found is I'm getting to know people, not just on a professional basis, but much more on a personal basis, which helps me anyway, personally understand, how they can comport themselves on a personal level and how that relates to what they were doing professionally. It's interesting. To me, it's fascinating. It puts people in the same spot. So somebody who may be the CEO of a Fortune 50 company is now standing online at the local grocery store with anybody else, and they're having a conversation that might not otherwise ever happen. And it's interesting. You learn that there are people there's dignity in every position I've found, and this is amplifying that perspective. And so I think that's what I mean by the humility effect. I think it'll help good leaders become better, and it'll help people who are in supportive roles become better at what they do, because they'll have perspective that they might not otherwise have had.
It's funny. You can't see this because it's an audio, but last night I was doing some domestic things that I normally wouldn't do. And my forehead and a vacuum cleaner had just had an argument. And so I've got those are the types of things that you're talking about. Our lives are different.
I know that it is, by the power of non-visual, but my hands are marked up a little bit for no other reason than they've got puppy teeth marks all over them. But that's kind of to the point of where I'm getting. We use the word humility, but it does become apparent that it's a huge value add. And I think, you can look at this. It's a global event. It didn't hit one country or the other. It is a global event, 180 plus or whatever the country number is now. It doesn't really matter, but it's affected everybody. And you can look at this and say, well, what kind of global events like that have occurred in our history as a humanity like this? You can go back 100 years of the Spanish flu, but we didn't have this level of communication back then. We didn't have the instantaneous capacity to reach anyone on the planet at any time using a mobile device in any language, translated or otherwise. And so that's kind of really brought it down to a level that I don't think we've ever seen. And hopefully to take a bad situation and get some benefit out of it.
Steve, it's been interesting. Some of the examples and the wisdom and insights that you've shared with us really highlight how a challenging situation, how a pandemic, yes, it has negative side effects to it, but there's also positive things that come out of that. Unfortunately, in the popular media, it's all gloom and doom and depressing if we're open about it. But let's look to the positive. As painful as this might be for people, for business owners, for communities, for neighbors, from a business perspective, from a business owner's perspective, what should be some of the positives that I'm looking to come out of this pandemic with that will forever stay with me and help me as a business owner? What do you think that would be?
Well, I'll tell you right off the top of my head, I believe that the technological innovation, we're going to go through a period of time right now where it's going to happen extremely quickly, spurred on, if you will, by the conditions of this pandemic. So if you think about applying certain capacities in the world of artificial intelligence in a way that benefits everyone moving forward. Now, this may sound a little bit crazy, but as an example, if you're into, and I'm involved on a board with a company that does some pretty interesting things with software as it relates to the gaming community. So if you think about it in terms of the entertainment world and the effects it has with the lack of the ability of crowds to gather, and what's this going to mean in the way of how we take our entertainment? So I suspect that you're going to see innovation that's going to make that much more interactive. So if you take a look at what's going on in the world of gaming and the world of entertainment, in the world of, say, sports venues, and I can see where you're going to see businesses emerge that kind of bring those entities together in a way that it becomes much more commercially viable so that people will still experience those kinds of things without putting themselves at risk. So I think that one of the good things that's going to come out of this is the level of innovation and creativity and the use of some of these concepts as applied to make things safer and better for the consuming public to take advantage of. And I think that will be one thing. I think it may also help us in the area of government. This is a situation where it's going to put all of the governments in a spot where they're going to become much more focused on what we need to do to facilitate preparedness so that we have the ability to manage these kinds of events in the future without crippling an economy, or at least managing it in a way that allows for these kinds of things to continue to operate and be healthy at the same time. So I think those are the kinds of things that I see coming out of this: the innovation, speed, and business will adapt and embrace some of that to be able to accommodate this new normal.
You've been involved in government and private and business sectors. How do you think the government's role, and then when you say government's, there's state and there's federal, there's all kinds. Do you think it's been good? Do you think it's going to change in the future, like you said? And in what ways? Does it need to be more involved, less involved, or right? You got any thoughts on that?
I think it probably covers the entire waterfront in that respect. I mean, there'll be examples where it's been pretty effective. There'll be others where it hasn't been as effective. I've always believed in my time in serving in the public sector that everyone who's there, regardless of their political background, they typically, for the most part, people that were involved in the administrative side of government, not the political side of elections and so on, but the administrative side, are always trying to do what they think is the right thing. So I think that this experience will highlight those that have been effective, and it'll recognize some of the shortcomings of those that haven't been so effective or that have attempted to do some things. So I think the good that'll come out of that is that there should be some baselines that will be established that'll make it a little bit more, I don't say predictable, but a little bit more easier to take on the part of people having to deal with their leadership in government, determining how they will conduct their day-by-day activities based on a particular public health emergency. If there's a little bit more predictability, if that's the right word, then I think there's less panic. There's less panic, then there's a little bit more thoughtful consideration of what the environment is. In the beginning, you may recall there was a bit of people were panicking, and justifiably so, that there was not enough information. So I think that's what I would see coming out of this that may be helpful, lessons learned kind of approach on the government side. And that's all layers, to your point, from the local to the regional to the state to the federal. In this case, you have to rely on those local governmental leaders. My experience has always been that, because they have eyes on the activity at the ground level, and you have to respect their capacity to understand their communities better than or as well as anybody can. So that's what I would see on that, Steve.
And Steve, speaking of government, and you're in a perfect position to be able to address this, there's been government assistance programs that have come out, and I suspect that's just the beginning, not the end, as we work our way through the pandemic back to business as normal. How does a business start, or where would a business start if they haven't already, in terms of finding out how the government assistance might be able to help them, where they should look, what they can do? And I know it's going to vary depending on the level of government and the state that you're in. Any general kinds of advice that you can give?
Yeah, I'll tell you what my opinion is, having worked in that realm, and on both sides, both on the side of whether it's a business or a nonprofit organization that was seeking the assistance either at the federal or state or regional level, and being able to comply with guidelines and write grant applications and so forth. In my view, it is an art form. It always has been. There's not a real science, even though there are guidelines. And that's the challenge which we see right now. Well-intended CARES Act here with getting resources out to the community and going through, in this case, the SBA and the banks throughout the region. But the reality is this: those organizations, private or otherwise, that have experience in how to manage through that artful dynamic are more effective at getting the approval. And that's what we've seen, a little bit of evidence of that. And so some of the advice is that this tends to be a process, although the conveyance of the information at the first stages suggests that it's relatively simple. The reality of it is it tends to be a little bit more complex, because once that opportunity for the distribution of those resources to small businesses is made, there's an infrastructure on the government side that manages that. And they manage that in a way that has certain conditions and standards that have to be met. And it's really a challenge for the small businesses, the very small ones. One of the organizations that I would be suggesting here for very small companies to take advantage of are the small business development centers in the U.S. that are a network of SBDCs in every state in the country. And they have people that is their job. They're consultants that are on board that have business experience, that advise other business leaders on how to access these kinds of programs and funds, not just the CARES Act, but others. And so that would be one step. We've worked with those organizations as a company in the past on cyber issues, and they can be very effective. And they're networked across the entire country. So if I'm a very small business, that would be one of the places I'd go, because these are people that understand this dynamic. They can step into this Willy Wonka machine known as the bureaucracy and be able to access the funding in a way that takes that pain away. I always, as an economic developer, took the position that we need to take the friction points away from that private sector business. They should not have to be burdened with having to understand how the bureaucracy works simply to access, say, capital to continue their business. There are organizations, either economic development organizations or small business development centers, who have professionals that this is what they do, and they're paid to do this kind of work. And in many cases, those services are available to the community. It's just a matter of finding out where to go. So that'd be one, Jeffrey, that I would say at a small business to take a look at. The other ones that are a little bit larger, they tend to retain professional firms. Sometimes they're accounting firms, and many of those have specialization. It's some of the kind of things that we have done on occasion where we understand how some of these programs work and can help advise clients on how to go through those.
Yeah, as we start to wrap this up, is there anything that you would want to tell businesses that we haven't really addressed in this talk that you think would be helpful in this time?
Well, I would highlight the things that we take a look at this point with all of our advisory work, and the areas to be mindful of as they move forward. Resiliency, as it relates to cyber. It's an important aspect of everybody's business in this day and age, just to be mindful of the need to maintain a level of security. And some of that is now driven by law and otherwise. And that, oh, by the way, will now include consideration of any pandemic after effects, future and otherwise. And not to forget some of the experiences that we've learned in the last 6 weeks to 2 months plus going forward in terms of putting that perspective on what's really important, both for the business to be viable, but also for the need to be able to recognize the value of the people that work with you and those that you work for. So we started out talking about the effects of this pandemic and creating a level of humility amongst many. And I think that holds true. Hopefully some of that sticks and stays. And that'll, in my view, will help the leaders of these businesses have both feet firmly on the ground as they make decisions for their business that take into account all of these things, both those for the bottom line and those for the human side of the business.
Resiliency, humility, some excellent advice. As we round things up and as we like to ask all of the guests on the podcast, knowing what you know, if you're a business leader and you can only do one thing as you look to the future, as we look forward, what would that one thing be?
Preparation. And as much as I can say, preparation and planning. It would be the one thing that you'd want to be able to do going forward, that as you look at how we're going to conduct our business, we're going to plan for these kinds of events in as much as we can so that we have some capacity to absorb that shot if and when it comes.
Well said. And for our community, if they want to follow up with you or learn more about what you're doing, Steve, where can they go? Where would you direct them to find you out there?
Well, we have a website, ridgeglobal.com, ridgeglobal.com. We have a number, it's 202-833-2008. We do, and believe it or not, we have clients that will call, leave a voicemail even today, and so we clean those up. But usually if they can find us on the website and we're there, and then we can be contacted that way.
Terrific. Well, listen, thank you so much for your insight and your wisdom today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Thank you both for having me. Enjoyed it.